Do we have any spoken prayer requests before we go to the Lord in prayer?
Lord, pray for sick, been sick children, almost the same citizens.
Amen.
I had a sister in Western Hospital, girl, got a heart attack, and do surgery Monday on it, that's what she'll make them up. They had to go in and on that diet down Monday. Then,
Seems like everywhere you turn, we've got problems, people sick, and maybe that we just realize it more as we grow older, problems we have in life, share. So let's remember these requests as we go to prayer tonight. And it don't take 1,000 people to reach God. It only takes, he said, where as many as 2 or 3. See, God recognizes minority. That's his. Majority is not his. And so God set the promise a very small amount of our effort and do a whole lot for others. And as we pray tonight, let's pray that God will grant these requests. And I guess we all have problems in our churches and everything. Tonight is before we left, while we was late. The preacher was there home, and he's got problems like everybody else in his church. And it gets disgusting. But you can't quit. So we've got to hang in there and work for God. So let's lift up the people that need to be lifted up in our prayers tonight. At this time we'll go to prayer. We'll ask Marshall, if he will, lead your thoughts in prayer.
Heavenly Father, as we give an eye this tonight, I thank you, God, for this opportunity. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for the song that's been sung, and just pray that you have given me someone. Heavenly Father, tonight as you've written many things that you'll have, Heavenly Father, in the question of prayer. We just pray, Heavenly Father, for those who can be any way, that you just give strength and courage, Heavenly Father, comfort. Heavenly Father, for those who feel sick in the hospital, we just pray, God, that you be thy will to heal once again, Heavenly Father, that you return home. Heavenly Father, we just pray tonight for God to be able to this family. Encouraged to bear on that word, to give you strength, Heavenly Father. Pray, Heavenly Father, be on this tonight, include prayer, so be on our midst tonight. We just pray, God, this night, tonight, that those things that be, which are lasting too late. Heavenly Father, you forgive us when we fail. Please pray for us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. If you'd like to, if you're not, if you got the Bible, we got your Bibles with you, I'd like for you to turn tonight with me to the book of Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter. I think here is a wonderful chapter, and I think that this chapter is more or less a chapter to be taught to really get the whole meaning of what Solomon is writing here. He's writing this book at the close of his life. And he's learned a lot. You know, you can't help but accumulate a lot of knowledge if you live to be 75 or 80 years of age. You learn from other people. You learn the facts of life. You learn a lot about life and what life's really about. So Solomon here, in his closing out of his life, he passes on to us a few things that would help us and we should realize. Like the young preacher, well, he's not a young preacher, he's been preaching quite a few years, said tonight, he says, you go out in your church, and he says, you win people to God, you work hard, you go out and you finally win somebody to God, and he said then along comes a preacher who is Southern Baptist or Missionary Baptist, and he's got nothing else to do but go in the home of your people, and he said they'll pluck them out one by one. He said, that's what's happening in my church. And he said he's got my people believing that we're nothings. And he says, the thing about it, we can't prove we're not nothings. He said, we don't do nothing. He said, that's what that guy told him. And he said, he asked the young man a question. He says, do your people tithe? Do your people support the pastor? Do your people visit? Do your people do this? And he said they come up negative. And he said he can't defend himself with this other preacher. And this is what Solomon is saying. He is saying, can we defend ourselves in life? Have we begotten knowledge? Now, I want you to go over this with me here. It's a good lesson. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, you ain't supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that. Solomon says here in the very first verse, to everything there is a season, a time to every purpose under the heaven. Now I want you to get this. First of all, he establishes one thing he has learned in life. Everything, it don't make any difference what it is, there is a season, a time to every purpose under the heaven. Now, this is something that it's hard for you and I to accept. See, the preacher said to me tonight, he said, another thing I'm facing, he says, is these preachers today in these churches that goes out and offers life and health plan. He called it a life and health plan, and that's what they call it, a life and health plan. If you go to church, never miss church, and if you give as you should give, and live like you should live, there ain't anything going to happen to you. You're going to become a millionaire. And he said, we call it the health and life plan. Everybody today, he says, their preachers drives a big automobile. He says their preachers get $1,000 a week to preach. And he says they're reaping a great harvest from what they preach. And Solomon is saying this right here in what the young preacher said to him. He said, these are my downfall. I can't compete with these people. What shall I do? Solomon is saying here, there's a time, and we hate to admit this, as long as we're youthful in youth, everything goes good for us, and we enjoy life. And we accept this, but when we are old and feeble and weakly, our bodies become weaker in acceptance of diseases and germs, and we cannot throw off the diseases that once we could conquer, we cannot throw them off anymore, then this is what Solomon's talking about. There becomes a change in each of us. We accept the youth, we accept the pride of our time, we accept the joy we're having and everything, but when the time comes for the other change in life, that's when we become depressed and not able to face a life like we should. And this is what Solomon's talking about. See, he's faced this. He has lived in a period of time that everything's been wonderful. He's had everything he ever wanted. He said he did. Everything he sought after, he got. He became the richest man, the most famous man, the smartest man, the greatest horse trader. He broke the record, see. He's like our athletes today in our society. He has set world records. Solomon set world records between him and God, God's creation. He became the wisest. He became the richest. He became the most aggressive and everything. He had more of everything than anybody else. But when he was having all this, when he had everything he wanted, it seemed like life was great and everything was going good. But when the time came, that when the accumulation of women in his life become a pest to him rather than something joyful. And then his life changed. His wealth no longer could buy the things that he sought in life. It did not help him. It could not buy him health. It could not buy him satisfaction of mind. The wealth he had and his intelligence brought him the knowledge that there's a time, there's a place, and there's a season for everything in life. And he realized this at the close of his days. Now, a time to be born. We all accept that, don't we? A time to be born. I think there's a song out we hear sing sometimes. A time to be born. To be born brings happiness. To be born many times brings happiness to the family, the parents, and enjoyment. And youth, there is nothing like youth. There is nothing. A child that's in a good home, that's had a good parents to raise it, to give it love and tenderness and things that it needs. This is the most precious time of this child's life. It is enjoyable to it as he grows up to be a young man or a young woman. And as they become in their teens, they begin to change as individuals, and then they become men and women in life to accept the roles of mothers and fathers and leaders of their communities. And all of this is an enjoyable and a great experience of our life and our time. But now notice the next word here. He said a time to die. See, to accept birth, to accept the enjoyment of youth, to enjoy youth, to enjoy our younger days, we also must realize there is older days. There is time of depression. There is time of need. There is time, it's not like it were when we were 20 years of age. And I think as we grow older in life, we realize this thing. To accept death is one of the most hardest things for us as people to accept. I was at a funeral one time, and it's always stuck with me. The woman that had died was 93 years of age. She had a 72-year-old son that made this statement: "What am I going to do? I've got no mother name." To me, that was a silly statement. A man 72 years of age had lived 2 years above the promise of man's life, 70 years on earth, saying, "I have no mother name." I was young, and I thought, well, by the time a man is 72 years of age, he can accept the responsibility and role of life without a mother. But when my mother died, I wasn't 72 years of age, but I realized how important that my mother was to me in life, and I realized what she had been to me in my past. It wasn't a silly statement anymore. See, what is silly to us at 20 years of age, at 60 years of age, it is not silly anymore. It becomes something real to us, a real fact of life. To hear a man, his hair white and most of it gone, to say, "What am I going to do? I've lost my mother, 93 years of age." And you would say, what could a 93-year-old woman do for a 72-year-old son? It was not physically this man was talking about. It was that she was his mother. He had never forgot who had given birth to him, one who had loved him, one he had went to in times of his problems of life, who had shared with him. You know, death seems silly to a teenager. You know, I'm going to share this with you. I have a good friend. And this friend of mine, we grew up together, same community. We went to high school together. He was older than I were. And I pastored Law River Church, and his family all went to that church, about all of them. And he grew up in that church. But I noticed the man's life. I finally wanted him, he was a distant to the church, and he was hard to get to go to church. And finally, he was working for me. And he had a strange personality, and I wanted this man to go. And I noticed that Sunday night, you never see him at church on Sunday night. Never would he come to church on Saturday night. And he would just come about one Sunday a month to Sunday school or to church, or sometime maybe not that much, or maybe sometime he'd drop in twice. When the offering plate would go around, I could see his body move to resentment. And those who took up the offer said sometimes he may put in $1. The man had a good job. He had a good retirement behind his job. He had a big family. He sent his children to college. Most of them, one's a civil engineer, one's a teacher, and one is a counselor, and so on. All of his children, except one, got a good education. This man worked the fact to help his family. But to go to church and recognize God and present his family to God, today he doesn't have one child goes to the Lord of the church. Other day he had a heart attack. Grace and I went in intensive care and stood to bed where he lay. He looked up at me and he said, "Preacher," he said, "Lowell," he said, "I've heard you preach so many times that life is like a thread." He said, "It had no meaning to me when you preached that, none whatsoever." And he said, "I've heard you preach about giving." He said, "It had no meaning to me. But," he said, "I realize now everything I've worked for other night come a little leaving me in 1 second time." He said, "I still could die." He said, "I'm so weak, I can't talk." He said, "I walked off my job on Thursday night as a strong, healthy man, waiting another year to retire." And he said, "Here I am, probably may never live to get out of here. May have to have open heart surgery, whatever." But he said, to me, church had no sense. To go to church on Saturday night when business meeting, it didn't make any sense. To go to church on Sunday night, it didn't make any sense. To go to church every Sunday, it didn't make any sense. To give, it didn't make any sense, in one sense of the word, what he was saying. But he says, "So help me. Tonight, money has no bearing. In my life, it has no meaning no more." This is what Solomon said. "I sought laughter. I sought enjoyment. I sought wealth. I got it all." But he said, in the meantime, I forgot God. He said that was the most important thing I needed more than anything was God. As I looked at this man, as I took him with the hand, and I said, "Let me pray with you." And I took him with the hand, and as he gripped me as tight as he could grip me, I could feel the nerves inside his hands gripping and moving. He thought he was going to die any moment. He's living on the guilty, the sentence of death that God put on man. But see what it done is catched him at an early age, 10 or 15 years earlier than he thought he was going to live. See, today people, church don't have any meaning to people. Giving don't have any meaning to people. They resent you tell them they got to give to send the gospel out. They get mad at you. They won't speak to you. They won't talk to you. They resent you. They want to get rid of you. But in the final analysis, as this man gripped my hand, he said, "So help me. Money has no meaning to me tonight." But it was his only meaning of his life. He could work on Saturday night. He could work on Sunday. Or he could do something. He could go out and enjoy and not go to church. He forgot God is what he's really saying. Isn't it so easy for us to forget God in our life? He said there's a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up that which is planted. You know, we're plucking up that which is planted now. It's the fall of the year. The frost has come. You go out in the yard and you'll cut down the flowers that's bloomed all year. The most beautiful flowers that's bloomed. That brought beauty. You walked through the yard and broke one off and smell of the fragrance. Those flowers are so beautiful, but what happened? A few weeks ago there came a frost and those flowers are no longer beautiful. You'll take a hoe and cut them down because they have lost their meaning. They're no longer, they'll never bloom again. But when you planted that flower, when you planted your corn, you go out and cut the stalks down. They're no more useful, they'll never bear no more, they're gone. And that's what Solomon is saying. There's a time to plant. There's a time to pluck up. And then he says, there's a time to kill. time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up. See what Solomon's saying? There comes a time to kill, a time to heal. You know, as I looked the other day in the paper, and I'm sure you saw it in the Manchester paper, where they tried this boy that killed his people over in Jackson County. Not only had he been involved in that murder, he'd been involved in other murders. And they showed the picture of two men, strong, muscle-bound men. They got 3 death sentences to be executed, been given death 3 times. As I looked at those young men in shackles and chains, tied around their waistband and tied their feet, tied to their hands, young men, their life is wasted. They are to be executed by the laws of our state. And that's what Solomon's talking about. There comes a time to kill, a time of execution. There's a time coming in our life. There's a time coming in the life of any animal. Deer season's on right now. And I've heard people say, I wouldn't kill a little innocent deer for anything. There'll be thousands killed. There's a time to kill in our season. That's what Solomon said. People go out, there's a time to kill squirrels. There's a time to kill rabbits. There's a time for death of a human family too, what Solomon's trying to get over to us. As well as the animals, there's a time, we're an animal family. There's a time for us to die too. We must realize that, he says. Now let's go on here. A time to break down, a time to build up. That's hard to accept, that there's a time coming in our lives, in our churches, that we'll break down. And we do. We break down to Satan. We break down, we fail many times. It's not God that fails, it's us. And then there's a time that we build up. There's a time for that. And then he says, a time to weep. A time to laugh. You know, when I grew up as a boy, and I guess you all heard this old saying, I had 2 brothers, and we get in the bed and we get to fighting with pillows, you know, throwing pillows at each other. And you know how a bunch of kids, girls and boys are doing this. And my mother come to the door and she'd say, now boys, you better quieten down. There's an old saying, laughter brings tears. And you know, my mother was so right. Before it was over, we'd get in a fight, my dad come in, take a belt off, and wire us out. Laughter brought tears. It brought, we didn't want to accept it, but it was fun. It was fun to take those pillows and to hit each other. But when it come time to be chastised for breaking the rules, we didn't enjoy being whipped, did we? Bringing forth tears in our eyes. Have you never seen a small child when his mother paddled it and she kept saying, if you don't quit doing that, you're going to get a paddling? And that tears seem like it's 3 times bigger when you get a paddling than it is any other time. Do you ever notice that out of a kid's eyes? What makes it? I don't know. It's hard. It breaks our heart some way or another. But here's what he says. A time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. Well, Miriam danced on the other side of Jordan River, on the other side of the Red Sea. When God drowned Pharaoh's army, it was enjoyment to her, and she danced and sang and played music on the Lord, the Bible says. We may use the word shout today, but she danced, the Bible says, used the word danced there on the banks of this old seashore. Why did she do this? Because she became victorious. But looked out there to see with dead bodies floating on top of horses and Egyptian people. But she's over here enjoying herself, laughing and dancing. What was the difference? The enemy was lost. She was saved. That made the difference. See, if you looked on back on the other side of the shore, if the vision had been long enough, you'd seen Egyptians crying and weeping because of the loss of theirs. But Miriam was dancing. Not one Hebrew was lost. See, there's a time and a season for us. a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. You know, there's a time to cast away stones. Did you ever go out in your garden or your yard and pick up every stone in your hand, throw them away? Well, down there at the house this coming spring, my daughter got out one day and her little old boy, he went around and picked up every rock he could off the yard, piled them up, and I said, well, I'll load them things up in the truck and haul them off, get them out of the way. Before I knew it, she sent a boy, the same boy that picked up the rock and hauled them down and piled them up, she sent the guy and come get them and build a flower bed for them. So the things that was a nuisance to her at the start became the things she wanted later on. And that's the way life is. The thing that become a nuisance to us, we cast aside later on in life, become the very thing we enjoy and the thing we want. And we don't realize these things. A time to embrace. It means a time to really embrace someone. Now, what you saying about it? It wouldn't be nice for me to meet one of these ladies down the streets of Manchester or out on the road and run up and grab her and hug her. That's not the time to embrace. But if you was at a funeral, the loss of a loved one, and they needed embracing, that's what the writer's talking about. You can embrace a lady. A pastor can embrace someone that's in need, or some young girl that comes to God and that's weeping and really wants to be helped, and they'll run to the pastor, and I've had them lay their arms around me. It's not that they desire me, it's that I can help them, that I'm the one who they trust to lead in me and confident in me. There's a time for this, and then there's a time for me not to do this. Say, I can't afford to go back to church house and grab every woman and hug them. You understand what I'm talking about? There's a time for both things to happen in our lives, and for each one to embrace each other. Well, we see people here, anytime we get happy or people get saved or at a funeral or something, and you see a young lady run up and hug a preacher, or you see a preacher hug someone else. It's a time comes in our life we can do these things, not for lust, but it's for refrain. He said it's to embrace each other, to help each other, to give each other a feeling of comfort. A time to get, time to lose. It's wonderful to get, but it's hard to lose, isn't it? A time to keep and a time to cast away. For years and years, Grace and I have been married 38 years. And she's the most conservative person with books and papers that I've ever seen. She gets those books and she piles them up, but after a while they start molding and she starts coughing. She wants to get rid of them. See what really happens to us in life. The things that we really are important to us, we want to preserve or keep, and after a while they become a nuisance to us. Time to throw away. No more important. A time to rend, a time to sow, a time to keep silent, and a time to speak. What if we learned that? A time to keep silent and a time to speak. There's a time that you can hurt people so deeply. And there's a time you can help people so much. Wouldn't it be wonderful that we as individuals would learn in our life all about it? I know a lady that's a good friend of mine and helped me as much as anybody in life. Not that she cares for me any other way, but just because I'm her pastor. She's always bake a cake or send me something, or if they have bake a cake or do something, she'll send me a piece of cake or something through Grace. Share. But this lady, at certain times of her personality, can cut you to 1,000 pieces in 3 words. She can take you and make you look just like a carrot with a guy with a strong butcher knife. In 3 minutes, she can cut you up. But in 3 minutes, she can show you more hospitality at the right time of her life and give you more than anybody ever meant. That's what Solomon's talking about. There's times in our lives that we can't say what we need to be silent. And then there's times that we need to be open, we need to speak. And what we say will help somebody else. A time to love, a time to hate. Would you ever thought that love and hate is two things that you need to do at times? Well, I can give you a great illustration. There's a time that you love sin, but there's a time you should hate it. There's a time that you hated your brother, and the Bible says we know we pass from death unto life because we love our brother. There's a time for love. There's a time for passionate feelings. There's a time for sweet words to be spoken. Every one in this house right here. Jesus wrote about love. Paul wrote about love, and Paul said charity is the greatest thing of a person's life, Christian life, is love. You know, I knew an old preacher one time. His name was Jimmy Jackson. And I was in 15 or 20 revivals with him. And you know, I never heard him say anything about me in his life. That old man was the pleasantest fellow you ever seen, but he had 4 sermons that he'd memorized. I didn't realize till just a few years before he died, he barely could read. His gracious uncle. He'd memorized him about 4 sermons. For about 50-some years, he preached those sermons. But he preached them in love. He never said a word about nobody in the pulpit. He was always a compassionate person and always smiling. He never got angry. Make no difference what you've done, you're going to make him get angry. And I thought he was one of the most pleasant preachers I ever met. But really, I forgot his ability to know and to learn because of his personality. He could woo you with his personality. That's what kept him going so long as a preacher. And what made him a likable preacher was his personality. He never said anything unkind. He was always pleasant. It took him through 50-some years of preaching. And he was chosen many times to preach annual sermons. Not that he's going to get up and preach any doctrine. He'd get up and preach that same sermon. I heard him, I was in so many revivals with him, I heard him preach the same sermon, I guess 30, 40 times. Sometimes he'd about double up on him if he went 2 weeks. But his personality, love, his tenderness that he had with people, what made people like him. Then I preached with an old man by the name of George Cobb. And some of you people may remember him. When he was young, he'd stomp the floor and make dust fly on the floor. And he'd point his finger at you and make you think he's going to come and get you. He was famous because of his ability to make you feel guilty. He could make you feel the need of God in your life. He made you feel guilty with his preaching. What I'm saying is love is one of the greatest salt things that there is. I don't care, right over here is Sister Murphy. She's raised a big family. She probably tell you what love is. She's loved her children. She's loved her grandchildren. She can tell you what love is. And right now, she still enjoys love. Loving her family, loving her children, loving her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, whatever. She survives on love. See, love plays such a great part in our life. What profit hath he that worketh in that wherein he laboureth? I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to exercise in it. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work of God that maketh from the beginning to the end. See, with all the knowledge that we could accumulate, we could never put it in a book. We could never put it on paper of what God has done good and beautiful from the beginning to his end. Solomon said in the conclusion, God made everything beautiful. And God made everything wonderful. It was not God's intentions for sin to enter in and change our personalities, to change our thinkings, to change our lives. God made us beautifully and intended for us to continue in a beautiful stage. Old age does not take away beauty. A 15-year-old girl is beautiful, but an 80-year-old lady is beautiful, and she is in many ways. See, beauty, God speaks about as love. It's what's inside us and how we put that inside us out is what love really is. And that's what God intended for us to be. To enjoy each other, the fellowship of each other. I was talking to a man